tonight, our program is The Evolution of Toys. You're going to revisit your childhood, which I already did by looking at some of this stuff. And our speaker is Jason Allen, the owner of Mantiques. And he will talk about Mantiques and some of these cool toys and some other things. So thank you, Jason, for coming tonight, and enjoy the program.
All right. Oh, she already killed the beginning of my intro, so I guess I don't have to introduce myself. Thanks for coming. I see a lot of old faces. I admit I've met the majority and know some of you very well, so I do appreciate it. It's, you know, the shop's been fun, and you know, got to meet a lot of you guys. One, I don't normally, you know, I normally just babble and kind of make stuff up, and somehow they called me a local expert, which I feel I'm a little young to be considered an expert. I just haven't experienced enough in life and had long enough to really get my knowledge built up. So admittedly, I'm more weaker when it comes to the toys from the Victorian era, I guess 1837 to 1901. You know, that stuff, there's not a lot around, so I don't encounter it. I haven't learned as much about it. I had to learn a bunch about it, a lot of different things to do this, which was fun. The research was definitely fun. My strengths probably get in the late 50s, 60s, and on, and that's the type of toys that are really popular nowadays. So probably a little bit more majority focus there, but we're definitely going to talk about some older things. So I think we should have fun. We're all big kids, and everyone loves toys anyways. So, okay, I got a quick question. What is a toy? A toy really can be anything. It could be a stick, which is it's just the most simple toy, because you can do anything with it. A stick is, you know, a sword, an implement to beat your sibling. You take a string, you add it to the stick, take another stick, you make a bow. And that's what toys are. Toys, they inspire our imagination, our creativity. When we're kids, they teach us how to express ourselves in different ways. Sometimes kids can't say it verbally, but they can show things through toys. And that's I think that's why a lot of people, especially me, we connect with toys. They bring us to a special place. First I wanted to say, yeah, there'll be a Q&A at the end, but if you have a question that's pertinent to what I'm doing, just raise your hand. I'll try to answer it. If it's something that either I'm going to go into more detail later or it's going to be a long, rambling answer, I'll probably table it to the Q&A. So don't be offended. You know, trying to get as much as I can and not come off, you know, too boring. So, and the Victorian era toys. So this is the old stuff. Oh, take that back. I wanted to do something, and I need this audience participation. Now, I want everyone to think about what's their favorite toy of all time. That one toy they got when they were a kid, that when they think of just meant the world to them. It was their, you know, as a special gift. It was just your favorite toy. And I think almost everyone has one of those. Now, would anyone like to share their favorite toy? Okay.
Mine was a combination of two. It was my little pony and my brother's Tonka truck, because my Tonka truck, his Tonka truck, dug the holes in the yard for my little pony's watering. My dad hated mowing.
Makes perfect sense. And when you think about the My Little Ponies, how does it make you feel? What kind of reaction do you have? Just My Little Pony?
Pretty much those are my carefree days of just play, and you know, that's mostly where my imagination was taken.
That takes us back to our childhood, when times were easy. Like My Little Pony. There you go, you can have it.
Oh, that's awesome, thank you.
So now you've got a toy from your childhood, and now everyone wants to raise your hand and participate. No Al, no Owen. You guys have expensive tastes. Toys leave a permanent mark on who we are. We don't even realize it sometimes till, say, 30 years after we had the toy, they decide to make a movie about it. And even if we despise the movie, because it's just, ruins our childhood. It doesn't ruin our childhood, per se, but it changes how we view things. I know from personal experience, so when you go back and watch some of those cartoons and stuff from our childhood, it's like, they're cool. I just don't know about the quality of the script writing in the early 80s. You know, it's like, okay, we got a toy line. Let's make some cartoons for it. So, one of the nice parts about having my shop is I get to see how it allows adults to connect to our childhood. And it allows us to connect with our inner child. It also, I see a lot of times where it's a father and a son, mother and a son, father and a daughter. And they can come in together, and it helps the father connect with the son and vice versa because they're in the same place. In the busy world we live in, we got, kids, marriages, bills, all this stuff. We forget to be a kid sometimes. And it's nice to see. And I see a few of my regulars out here that do come in. And it's fun. Dad gets to talk to him about how cool the toys were when he was little and how much better they were. And the kid gets to show him some big, deluxe, amazing figure. And they're like, that's better. And it's like, I'm guessing a technical term, it's more detailed. It's probably bigger, more elaborate, all that. But nothing replaces our toys. It's like music. The music from probably junior high through my early 20s is the greatest music ever made. Nothing made after it will be as good. And that's just the way I feel about it. And that's kind of how we are. It's just, I hear new music, I'm like, that's fair. That's decent. And then, but it's not as good as what came out when I was a kid. I mean, these artists nowadays, they all do lip syncing and only dress half naked. And, oh my God, I just became my parents. In the Victorian era, which was from the classical Victorian era is considered 1837 to 1901. Now, for those toys in particular, kids didn't have toys back then. A kid would be lucky to get one toy ever. And if they had a toy, it was probably handmade. So those kind of toys now, because they're so rare and they're so few and far between that they're really hard to even come across, and I haven't encountered that many, except for personal collections, a few museums, and that sort of stuff. So first one we're going to start with are these guys right here. Now these are actually, it's a horse, but I think it's really horsehair. It's actually hair. It's like a mini taxidermy piece. And that's what they would use. They would use leather, wood, stuff it, and this was a toy. This was a toy in that era. This one, I love this bull. Yeah, it's got glass eyes. It's a toy, but at this point it's like a piece of art. But that was the era. I mean, to think of giving our kids, some dead taxidermy stuff, and that's a toy. you know, I don't know. I've handled these many times, and I don't have fleas, so they're probably safe, you know. But also from this era, if you took, it would look very similar to this, and it would have a flat wood bottom and some rollers, and it was a pull toy. And those are very collectible, and in nice shape can be, nowadays, fetch a pretty penny. Fortunately, I didn't have one sitting around to bring in, so we had to kind of wing it. Also in that era, the small lead soldiers, that you could either buy them blank and they'd paint them, or they could get the molds and melt the lead and paint them themselves. And that was, you know, that was the first army men, were these little lead soldiers. Cast iron items first started appearing then. This obviously isn't, you know, 1890s cast iron train, but it's a later one, but it's a similar example. You know, simple toys. But around the turn of the century, this would have been an expensive toy. This isn't a toy that every kid gets. It's just mainly the rich kids back then. And that was kind of the thing with toys heading up until post-World War II. They were really not, kids didn't have a lot of toys. So, also, the dolls of that era, there was, of course, your rag doll, pre-Raggedy Ann, the one the mother would make, hand sew it. There was also the porcelain, it's called a bisque doll, and it's like a porcelain, and then it would have a stuffed body. And those are ridiculously collectible. But that was what the doll of that era was. I mean, probably the majority of girls who ever got a doll, it was a rag doll. It wasn't a bisque doll. They were handcrafted. It actually came over from Germany with a lot of the late 1800s immigrants. So, but they were a deluxe toy that very few kids got to afford. Also was the first appearance of tin lithographs, which is the printing process on the metal, the bright colors. That one's from the 50s, but they start out with watering cans, buckets, shovels, but they were bright. They looked good, and that's what caught kids' eyes. So when they're there, they're begging their parents. I'm sure it went on back then. This has to be in children's genes, and they know how to manipulate. And that's the cheap toys they put by the counter at any store. In the business, because I guess I'm in the business, it's called the hush-up. Those are hush-up toys. Seems legit. They are. I got 2 kids. That's what you do. Like, if you just, please, for the love of God, just be good and let me get in and out of here with no fiascos, major outbursts. Yes, I will buy you the couple dollar toy by the register. Some call it bribery. I call it, you know, I used to have no receding hairline, so, you know, genetically it's not there. It's not on my mother's side. The guys have full heads of hair, but mine's magically falling out. I assume it's probably the kids. So, also in the Victorian era, and they're very rare, they had a few complex toys, multiple moving parts, mechanisms. They started incorporating stuff that watchmakers, clockmakers were using. They made I guess it'd be about 12 inches by 10, and it was a mini sewing machine. And I saw it once at a museum, and it was the most intricate, just beautiful piece. It was literally like fine art. And so there were that, but that's, you know, there probably were only 5 of those made. But they also introduced the round racing games, where you could race the horses, and they actually had the first automobiles came out then. And you could switch them out, and you could either race your automobiles, you could race your horses. And if we think about the turn of the century, how crazy, absolutely crazy it is that they had toys that you could race when the majority of them, the country, didn't have electricity, didn't have running water. But there are these toys that are, you know, that complex. It just kind of shows what happens and how things work out. You know, and at that time in our country, there was, you know, people lived very simple lives. The the living middle class that was established post-World War II, no one heard of that. That wasn't an option. You worked hard, you farmed your land, you did what you had to, but having extras like mechanical toys just seemed redundant. Then the turn of the century came. Now, in the early 1900s, we're still dealing with the same thing as far as toys and not being available to most kids. But there are a few major toys. There's still, a lot of them are still around this day in some form or another that came from that era. First one I'm going to mention is the teddy bear. I think everyone knows teddy bears. Teddy bear. Obviously not turn of the century, but late 40s. It's teddy bear. The teddy bears from that era would be more jointed, like this little wood guy here. But just want to give you kind of an example. And those actually, how teddy bears got their names, there was a political cartoon that had our president, Teddy Roosevelt, in it. And I believe he wouldn't shoot a caged bear or something. And one man, Morris Mitchum, in 1902, saw that cartoon, and he decided to make a stuffed bear. And he actually had to get permission from the President of the United States to use the name Teddy Bear. Well, he made all these bears, put the name, it was a hit. Sold out first run. Now this man used the money he made from that to start the Ideal Toy Company, which Ideal is the game right down here in front. Mousetrap, which I think we all have played in one form or another. That's an Ideal game. So a guy basically sees a political cartoon, makes a toy out of it, and starts one of the longest running toy companies in this country's history. That's pretty awesome. Yes, Wesley?
I think, I'm not sure on the teddy bear, I think the idea to make teddy bear came from the actual cartoon.
Nope. It was pre that, 1902. Yeah, it's 1902. But, hey, I think I'm always right, but I'm willing to admit I'm not always right. So, no problem. That's why I said ask questions. The more questions you ask, the more you guys do the work for me. Then it's easier on me.
Tell us the God's honest truth. I found that on Wikipedia. No question.
Possibly. There was definitely a little, between that and the, price guides, that's, where else are you going to find that type of information? I mean, what you should do is you should go to the library. That's what you should do. And even if you're going to use the internet, come to the library, purchase drinks, spend some time, support the community. But, yes, on to the next thing. Also in the early 1900s came the erector set. Now, the erector set, metal pieces, they're beams. You could build all sorts of mechanical towers and rocket launchers and windmills. And this toy actually helped spawn literally generations of engineers. That and Legos are toys that, they encourage creativity. It encourages building. It's not a mindless shoot-'em-up video game. It's a quality toy. Also in the early 1900s, and I apologize if anyone's a big train aficionado. I don't know a lot about trains. I mean, I can spot a Lionel, obviously, but we're not going to go into much. But 1901, Lionel trains came. The first ones were cast iron. Probably going to be more along the lines of that. This one is post-war, post-World War II, late 40s. And trains went on to become a huge, huge part of our country's history. Toy trains were considered, by the 1950s, 1 in 2 households with children had a train set. That's, thinking nowadays when you walk into a Toys R Us and all the options, I can't think of any toy that possibly would approach that. The only other one that gets close close, ironically, evolved from train sets, and that was the slot cars. And by the early to mid 70s, slot cars were, the same way, almost one in every 2 houses. Everyone likes slot tracks. I mean, we're a car country. We have an obsession with cars and toys. Put them together, no lose. Yes?
What exactly is a slot track or slot car?
That's your basically where you put the cars on. It's got the metal strips. The remote control race cars that are on the tracks.
Oh, okay. So a little groove in there.
Yeah, like from the slot, the groove. See, slot cars. But that's, slot cars, sorry. See? Needed help from you guys. Slot cars, they're just the race tracks. They're fun. They made slot cars to look like all our favorite cars. You could race them. You could, talk trash to your brother after you beat him. Have some fun with it. In 1916, his name is John Lloyd Wright, decided he was with his father in Japan. His father he was an architect, engineer, and he designed a hotel. And he's seen an overlapping that they used decoratively, and it inspired him to make Lincoln Logs, which I know they still make a few sets nowadays, but when I was a kid in the 80s, they were still pretty popular. I mean, I had a bucket of Lincoln Logs. That was just par for the course for that era. Also, Crystal?
Did they have to get permission to use the name Lincoln?
He's dead already. Honestly, I don't know. I know, but Lincoln Logs, Lincoln, I probably some sort of correlation. Log cabin, Lincoln. I know they're called American blocks originally. Lincoln Logs, at some point, a toy company got a hold of it and thought, we need something catchy, because catchy names sell. 1917, radio flyer wagons. I think everyone knows what a radio flyer wagon is. They named it after the flying radio waves and a wagon. So, radio flyer is the name associated with wagons. It's a staple in Americana. Most boys had a wagon. I say wagon, and you can picture a Norman Rockwell painting and a boy in a wagon, and it's just a Dennis the Menace in his wagon. That's just, the wagon it's part of our history. And radio flyer was the wagon. And it wasn't any better than others from the era, but it had a cooler name.
That's also why your parents told you to go down the grocery store, bring them back in the wagon.
Yeah, wagons. I hauled all kinds of stuff. Even put myself down a hill in a wagon once. See, I'm good for making the mistake, but I'm pretty good for only doing it once. Like, I'm capable of a lot of, especially back then, adventures, we'll say. But once I learned my lesson. So, but also, Tinker Toys came out, and I couldn't dig any up right now. I think most of us know Tinker Toys. Thank you. Tinker Toys came out in 1914. They were marketed as a safer alternative to the Erector set, because, I don't see anything bad happening with one of those. I say kids get tetanus shots for a reason. So they were, and that was when they came out. They probably didn't really peak in popularity until the 50s, but that's what happens. Yes, young man?
Well, I was thinking that we watched movies and someone came up by making Lego Batman the movie. It was kind of really good.
Well, yeah. Well, there's a long history of toys influencing movies, and then the exact opposite. They make a movie, and they're like, this is a really, really cool movie. Let's make some toys.
Yeah, by putting them together, right?
Yeah. You put toys in a movie, what could possibly go wrong? I mean, we have Toy Story, that not only created new characters in Buzz and Woody, but, there's a Slinky Dog and there's Mr. Potato Head. So that's... I don't know, if you show it to your 5-year-old cousin and then who has My Buddy doll, I don't see anything wrong with that.
I'm going to agree with that. I had nephews.
Yeah. Sorry, Aunt Jerry. I may or may not have been involved in such a situation. Statute of limitations, okay, I did it. It was great. But he could be a pest back then. He totally deserved it. I swear. It was one of those gifts that kept on giving long after I left. And my aunt does bring it up to this day. You can't mention Chucky or even any doll without a...
No DVD set of Chucky movies for her?
Not for her, but, if I did get a Chucky doll, it would be pretty funny to throw it in bed with him when he's sleeping and let him wake up to it. But that would just be wrong. In 1915, 1918 era, is when you first started to see the stylized rag doll, where they basically, obviously rag dolls have been around for a long time, but they gave her a name, Raggedy Ann, and eventually her buddy Andy. Is it her brother? Brother? See? And I should have made that connection, but they made a stylized one. They made it the same. The I Love You heart, which I don't even know if she has one, will be under here. It was basically just, taking something old, repackaging it a little bit, calling it something new, and making a fortune out of it, which wish it was just that easy. But
There's also a book series.
yeah.
And the cartoon.
Yeah. Well, it went on for... Yeah, that's why we're talking, that's 100 years of Raggedy Ann. I think that shows how some toys, a teddy bear, Raggedy Ann, that stuff is timeless, absolutely timeless. Because a baby doll, a little girl with a baby doll, right there. I can't picture a young girl without her baby doll, having it in a headlock, walking around with it. Well, hey, having my shop, I have some serious female collectors of guy toys. And if I make any jokes, they are... Well, I think that's why a lot of people get into toys. We connect with it, or it makes us think of someone, So, let's see where we're ready. Also, tin wind-up toys from the era. The more German immigrants that came over brought it over here. They had been in Germany probably since the 1850s, but they really hadn't taken off much stateside. And they started, when enough immigrants came over, they brought their skills with them, and then they started producing these toys. And that, I think that's one of the beauty things of America. They brought these skills with them and made it their own. And there was also a lot of ride-on animals with wheels. Like, I think my son had a little horse that had wheels, and he could ride around on it until he, got a little too big for it, and it just was flying around the house a little too fast. And that type of toy was also something you could make. If you got a few wheels and someone with a little bit of carpentry ability, that's one of those toys that probably started to creep into the everyday family, because it wasn't an expensive toy. The 1920s, and besides Prohibition, and it's the start of the Great Depression. That era, it's post-World War I. In our history books, I feel a lot of times it's overlooked. But as far as toys go, this is when the pedal car craze started. They had been around since the 1890s. But by the 1920s, 30s, they really started making nice working pedal cars that were modeled after current cars, very few trucks, mainly cars in the beginning. And they were the elite toy. If we adjusted pricing from what they cost then to what they cost now, a new pedal car would cost between $2,000 and $4,000. And I mean, a lot of us have spent money on gifts for our kids that we shake our heads about. Like, really? That much? Oh, it's going to break it. But it was the toy. Heading towards the 30s and 40s, when you first started seeing pedal cars evolve into the pedal airplanes. They started incorporating almost fire trucks, more complex, little bells and whistles, because with any toy, if you just make it the same for years and years without changing it, people are going to lose interest. You got to make it better so you can get the same lunatics to buy it again. You know, $2,000 to $4,000. I mean, I love my children. If I could win the lottery, and I don't know if I could justify that. Like, okay, but you can't ride it because it'll be really valuable someday. Yeah, it's a museum. Yeah, that's. Also in the 20s, tricycles became commercially produced. We all know the little tricycle, but these ones were much more ornate. They were still pretty pricey, but that was when we first started to see tricycles. You know, back then, not every tricycles, bicycles, it wasn't a rite of passage. It was really for rich kids. It was really for kids who were lucky enough to get it. And our country was at a downturn, the Depression. It was, people were dropping out of school in 3rd grade to, you know, pick coal off the train tracks to support their family. And that was the reality of our country at that time. So we're probably gonna, the 30s into World War II, you know, we're gonna probably blow through that pretty quick now because that's a dark age of toys, yes?
Back before the 30s, they actually had started making wooden scooters from milk carts.
Oh, well, yeah. That's why the dates on stuff is hard. It usually revolves around patent dates because it's easy to say, well, there's one in my family in this year, but, you know, there wasn't the evidence. Not everyone had a camera phone. You know, that's... Okay, 1930s. The beginning of the cowboy dress-up. Everyone can picture a little boy with his gun on, his chaps, his little hat, probably pulling a wagon. And that was when that first started. And then the 40s into the 50s, it really took off. And you had Hopalong Cassidy and these characters that it was definitely a boom. It was definitely a boom. But like anything, it slowed down. Also, plastic army men. The plastic standard annoying army man that you step on, that we took lighters to, torches, firecrackers. I mean, I heard of kids that did that. So, I would never, ever be part of that. Shh. My mom, my aunts here, my mother. There's enough people here that they're going to call me. They're definitely going to call me on it. Also in the 30s came the BB gun. Obviously, I don't have one of that era, but late 60s, early 70s, you know, your standard pump, air, not high-powered cartridges. I mean, yeah, you shoot yourself in certain places, it's really going to hurt. But back then, toys had a little danger to them, a little mystique. Obviously, Daisy made the most renowned BB gun of all time, the Red Ryder BB gun.
Oh, you can put your eye on it.
That's see? Are you reading my cards again? It was modeled after the Winchester lever action, and it did become infamous in toys. Christmas Story. I mean, the kid, all he wanted was it. And all his parents, his teacher, Santa, even told him was, you'll shoot your eye out. And then he finally gets it on Christmas morning. And what happens? He almost. He breaks his glass. But yeah, is that life? You finally get it, you almost shoot your eye out. That's, and do that. At the end of the 30s, we started to see board games. Scrabble, Monopoly came out in this era. They didn't quite take off yet because obviously we're in the Depression. Europe's at war. Our country wasn't viewing things, sitting around and playing games wasn't considered what you did. You were school, work, do whatever you had to do to survive. Luckily, eventually the games get pretty cool. I mean, Mousetrap in the 60s, all those pieces. I'm sure it never really worked back then because I tried setting that up and I got it set up and then I tried to use it and it was all downhill from there. It was just, yeah, I felt, it was humbling for a grown man.
Me and my cousin used to play that.
Yeah.
We always set up first before we went to the board.
Yeah, later they got really good at it. Later they got really, really good at it. So then came the 40s. World War II had an effect. Their metal was being used for the war effort. They started using plastic, wood, going back to something, this would be a more realistic 1940s toy than this. This is way too valuable for the war effort. Boys' toys started to be getting geared towards military. A lot of the metal trucks, they started getting military paint jobs. Man, oh, that's an Army Jeep. It looked like the red Jeep they released the year before, but they'd given it a Army paint job. And definitely, when our country's at war, it has different effects on toys. And we'll go into that. Here's a fun one, which somehow was invented during World War II. Weird, an unusual toy. An engineer got a hold of a spring. Yeah, we know. Yep. And he invented, there it is, my slinky. All I could come across on short notice was a small slinky. And 1943 came up with the toy. It took him till 1945 to have the debut of his toy. It was at Gimbel's department store, and I think he had about 400 of them. He did his display, walking down the stairs and all this kind of stuff. Sold out the 400. I've got a feeling he didn't tell the parents how easy they tangled up. I mean, I remember I got a slinky for Christmas, and I tangled it up, and I handed it to my dad. He looked at it, around it. That was the slinky. They were cool, but they were doomed for failure. And they're still cool, but they're one of them toys that we know have a shelf life. One cool thing that with the slinky, it led to the Slinky dog toy, which was an actual toy, and then later became popularized with Toy Story. In the 1940s, the Ouija board, which was actually considered a toy, started to hit its peak. I don't know if what it had to do with the war and those type of things, but yes, the Ouija board became very popular. It's actually much older. It was in 1890s. It was a parlor game. They'd have their parties and everyone sit around. And then during World War I, spiritualist con artist used it as a divining tool, like a crystal ball. And he was making these claims. Yes?
I actually still sold it for a dress as a toy.
Yeah. Well, they have a glow-in-the-dark one last time I seen it. So, and that actually is what leads to the occultic stigma that it holds today, is that this guy who people thought was really, connected to demons and stuff, but it turned out it was planted people and a con like most things. 1901, William Fuld released the talking board Ouija, the first time that was actually used, and he produced them on his own, sold them. they're, you know, they gained in popularity. And by the 40s, for some reason, they hit their peak. Eventually, 1966, it was bought out by Parker Brothers, which led to eventually being bought out again and again. But this is the original Ouija board. This one would be from 1951. This is the planchette. It would go on there. People would touch it. It would answer questions. I've bought and sold many Ouija boards. Nothing too weird's happened. I mean, this one floats across the room occasionally, but what's strange about that? Can't be anything, just floating Ouija board. Well, so now we finally get back past the war. And now it's, okay, there's jobs, there's money. You know, there's people are making things, our country's booming, and there's a lot of babies come out of the air, the baby boom. But people weren't only having large families, they had the money. They had expendable income. They could spend money on their kids. So that's when toys really took it to a new level. This is when the rise of the board game started in the 1950s. This is when on a Friday night you'd sit around your TV, you know, maybe eat your dinner there, and then you would sit down and play a board game as a family. And board games continue to this day. I mean, they're still there. They're not, the video game industry has probably taken quite a hit to it, but that's what happens. That's what happens with time. Also in the 50s, Fisher-Price, I think we all know Fisher-Price, they identified a plastic that allowed them to do brighter colors. It was more durable, and then that led to a lot of these pull toys. This one right here is from '61. It's a farmer. Pull him, his head goes back and forth. They made many, many variations. The first toy they released using this plastic was the Buzzy Bee. Some people remember the Pull Bee, that was the first one. And it really changed things for Fisher-Price. That plastic inspired new ideas, which led to their all-time grand slam, Little People. We all remember Little People. They make them now, and they're not so little. They're kind of fat and round. Really disappointed. You want to get your kids some Little People, and you see that they're like not cool like this. That's a cool. I mean, Little People, I think we all remember the barn that when you open the door, it moves. There was the school. There was a house. There was an airport. There was pretty much everything. Yeah, they made the Sesame Street ones. That's one of those neat things where they take an existing loved product and they add it to Sesame Street. In the collecting world, that, you know, is kind of excellent. So, but that was, these type of toys always gained in popularity. Something else that happened in the 50s was the character-based toys. Roy Rogers, Hopalong Cassidy, Dick Tracy, Davy Crockett. Those type of toys came into it, and it was just natural. If this is what people are watching, let's sell them stuff because of it. And if we can make toys, not only will we get more people watching our show, we'll get people watching our show buying the toys. And this really started to take off in the 50s. Also in the 50s, the staple of toys and just, it was the steel truck era really started to take off. You had Structos, Buddy Al, but you had Tonka, and everyone loves Tonka, right? Okay, 1946, Mound Metalcraft up in Minnesota, they mainly did like garden gadgets, tools is what they did with their metalwork. Well, by 1955, they had changed their name to Tonka, and they started producing these toys. By 1964, they started their Mighty line, which I think we all... This one's probably early 70s, but... And I love how it wears its scars with pride. This had a good life at some point, and now it'll die in someone's garden probably. But this was a toy that every kid had. I had one. They were built well. They were fun. They went outdoors. You could use them in the sandbox. You could use them to haul your action figures around. They were a multi-use tool. and became a staple. I mean, how many generations grew up getting a Tonka truck? If it started in the early 60s, that's many, many generations. And you still see them to this day, and they're a staple. Kids need them. In the 1950s, there was one of our all-time friends came into the picture, Mr. Potato Head. Let's see where, there he is. He doesn't stand up so well because it's really kind of one of those concepts. But originally, the maker, all he sold were the parts, and you were supposed to use vegetables. Well, this is post-World War II America, and the thought of wasting vegetables, wasting food for your kid to play with it seemed a bit obscene. It did not take off. It was not until he partnered with Lerner Toy Company, which later became Hasbro. By 1960, they gave him the head, and that changed it. Mr. Potato Head is an iconic toy. They're still popular. Another toy that was in Toy Story, I even seen, they have a Darth Tater. It's awesome. Well, of course they do. From the Chatty Cathy doll line, this pretty young lady here is the Charmin talking doll. Now, she was in the middle of the line. She's different from the other ones because they had changeable records, so you could change out her records. I think there was 9 per side, 12 records. Over 200 sayings for a toy in the 60s is kind of crazy. Right here we have a nice one, the Beautiful Chrissy doll. Now, the Beautiful Chrissy doll came out in 1969. She had the feature where you could pull her hair out, and then it would crank back up. I'm not doing any of those things right now with her, because with old toys, yeah, sometimes they don't stay together. Yes. It's as collectible. It's as collectible as a lot of things from that era because did any of you ladies have this doll? One, two. Okay, that's what makes it collectible. They identify with it, and that was a cool doll. The whole mod outfit, very 60s, very hip. Also, we got kind of your cookie cutter 1960s ideal baby doll. Like I said earlier, every kid had one of those. That was the absolute needed toy for every little girl. A baby doll to put in a headlock. Has the classic sleepy eyes, so when you lay them down, the eyes closed. Always creep me out. Always creep me out. Now we're going to get to one of those major iconic toys, Barbie. I don't have a Barbie #1, unfortunately. These aren't even mine. I had to get them on loan from my mother-in-law. That is probably the iconic girl's toy. It was developed by Ruth Handler, wife of Mattel co-founder Elliot Handler. Now, in 1956, Ruth and her family went on a vacation to Europe. While they were over there, she found these dolls. She bought 3 of them, one for each of her daughters and one to take back to show Mattel. That is a Bild Lily doll. It was an adult toy based on popular comic strips in Germany, but it was more meant for adults. It had curves and these, nighttime outfits, evening wear. But she thought that would take off in America. And because she's kind of married to the co-founder of the company, it got done. Barbie launched in 1959. It was a huge success. It was one of the first toy companies that used extensive television marketing to sell it. They realized before a lot of other ones that television was the next step. Radio advertising was not worth it. Even print advertising. Television was your best bang for your buck. Also with Barbie, they went crazy with the outfits and the play sets, and they just gave it so many ways to make it your own. People love that. Accessories? Come on. So they gave, eventually, Ken, Midge, Tootie, her little cousin. And Barbie, in the beginning, she either had homemaker wear, she had her evening gowns. They did do a stewardess, because that was, I guess, an appropriate job for women. You can be a stewardess, or a homemaker, or a pretty girl on someone's shoulder. But that changed. Barbie's became a lot of things. She's an independent woman, teachers, doctors. She became a rock and roll star. And whatever a fairytopia is, I guess, you know, there's a Barbie fairytopia. So she's held many titles, and she's influenced so much with toys. Just think of all the generic knockoff Barbies. You know, the grocery store Barbies. Yeah, they're just those, and we won't even think how it influenced Barbie. Eventually leads to this, which we'll get to. But then you have the Bratz dolls. You know, you have the more modern Monster High dolls. I mean, Barbie started all of that. And it's an institution. It's just one of those toys that it's an icon. It's Barbie. Quick fact, she named it after her daughter Barbara. So one of the two daughters that was with her in Europe, the Barbie was named after. Now we're going to get to one of my personal favorites, just because they were, when I grew up in the 80s, they just seemed so hard to find, and a few friends had one that their dad may have given them, G.I. Joe. Now, G.I. Joe was, it was 1964, we're in the height of the Cold War, Cuban Missile Crisis, all this stuff. So they wanted a macho war hero. They wanted the antithesis of Ken. You know, see, it's like, this guy right here intimidated him. It gave Ken a complex. Ken had to go to counseling. But but they were very, very particular about not calling him a doll. It is not a doll. It is an action soldier, which we see real quick. Action soldier, action figure, but it's an action soldier. But the one thing they did from Barbie was the accessories. They went out there and they gave as many accessories and different outfits, and I mean, there was planes, there was some small boats, there was an astronaut capsule. Like right here we've got, this would have been some winter gear. You'd have your Navy, you know. See, I'll get to that. Just wait. See?
Sorry?
No, that's foreshadowing. Astronaut suit. So, and G.I. Joe was a hit. It was huge. I know the first run sold out almost immediately. Like, stores couldn't keep it in, it sold out, and there was no eBay to go buy it for 5 times the price for Christmas. It's the way it was. They were out, yeah. It was one of those toys that kind of started the parents, you know, really going distances to get a toy for their kid. You know, it was a great toy. But something was going on in this country in the 60s, you know, Vietnam kind of left. It was getting pretty bad by the time the end of the 60s, early 70s rolled around. From TV to newsprint to losing your brother or neighbor, war became too real to people. They weren't ready. They weren't comfortable like, yeah, I want my kid to grow up to be a soldier. They're like, maybe not. You know, it's nothing wrong with it, but at that time it was a scary proposition. So G.I. Joe switched it up, and that's when they brought us the adventure team. They were rescuers. They were adventurers. They had one play set that was in search of the pygmy gorilla. I mean, but it was going away from the military-based toys. People did not. It would have killed G.I. Joe. The 70s, they were still popular. As the 70s went on, they got to the Super Joe at the end, and Star Wars had came out at that point, so they were doing aliens and weird. That was the death sentence for a while for G.I. Joe. Okay, so that takes us into the 70s, Adventure Man. One of the key things that came out in the 70s was the Atari. Looking back, what we have now, Atari isn't anything. But it was a take-home arcade game in 1976. And because of Atari and the whole home computer boom of that era, it led to Nintendo, Sega, PlayStation, Xbox One, whatever. All those. And it started with Atari, which is actually pretty basic, and they kind of killed themselves. They allowed anyone to make games for it, so a lot of bad games came out for Atari. And back then, games were expensive. We're talking Atari games in the 70s were 30 or 40 bucks. That's system for 200 in the 70s. But there was something addictive about it. Also in the 70s, and I had one and I just couldn't dig it up, was the Easy Bake Oven. It came out in the 60s, but 70s was everyone needed an Easy Bake Oven. They needed an oven that would cook things with light bulbs. Not possibly a fire hazard. But it worked. And it's an institution to this day. They still make Easy Bake Ovens. And I'm hoping the technology's maybe gotten a little better, safer. Lawsuits, I'm sure, would, slow those kind of things down. Also in the 70s, we had the Mego Corporation. Now, the Mego Corporation was, all they focused in the beginning was selling hush-up toys. Remember those? Hush-ups, cheap toys. That's what they did. Well, the owner's son, he got out of, I think it was business school. His name was Marty. He came out with fresh ideas. He was going to change the world with this company. I'm sure he was really annoying to work with because, those type of, but he was right. So he went out and they started buying merchandising rights from everything. Whether it was a TV show, a movie, comic books, that they did it, and they released Star Trek. We've got Spider-Man. And they're awesome figures. One of the things they did, though, is they used a body that could be interchangeable between them all, so all they had to do was sculpt a new head and then change the outfit, maybe change the color of the hands. They also did monster toys, and those are always popular. This we call the bacon-wrapped mummy. I mean, it's a Mego mummy, but it does look like it's wrapped in bacon. But, don't put it in your oven. Don't ever put toys in the oven, because your mom might decide to preheat the oven, not know what's in there, and you burn down the kitchen. Sorry, Mom. Yeah, it happened. I was framed, by the way. I was definitely framed. Well, and then some Megos were really popular in the 70s. They are highly collectible now. But they decided not to merchandise the Star Wars movie. They were busy trying to bring a Japanese company, Takara, made Micronauts, and they wanted to bring them to the United States, so they blew off Star Wars. Well, and we'll go more into Star Wars, but Star Wars hit, and so you left Mego chasing. They were doing the black hole, just any sci-fi type thing that came out, they were merchandising, hoping to be the next Star Wars. And you don't want to be the next, you want to be the first. And that was kind of the death sentence for Mego, but they made great toys. They just made great toys. And that, isn't that beautiful? Spider-Man? Love it. Now we get to one of the most iconic toy lines of all time, Star Wars. First off, Star Wars changed things up because most figures were this size, this size. That was your action figure size. They decided to go to the 3 3/4 inch, which really led to collectability. Kids could put them in their pockets. They could have a bunch in a box. And George Lucas made action figures for everything, absolutely everything. So if the character was in it for 15 seconds, he made an action figure for it. That's what he did. But and ironically with Star Wars, the movie came out in 1977. By Christmas, they didn't have toys ready. So it's Christmas morning, you open up a box, you see this box, it's got all the Star Wars characters on it, and you open it up, and you got a certificate. You got a certificate that you had to send away to get future Star Wars figures, which it's the most brilliant hustle I've ever thought of. I can sell an empty box with a certificate, but parents had to have it. It was the toy. A sealed one of those in the box, a certificate, sealed in a box, no action figures, just sold for $4,500. If you have the box set that they would send you, complete with figures in really nice shape. That'd be more around $1,000. But Star Wars changed it all. They marketed everything. The vehicles and ships were they were detailed, they were big. They just wanted to make it. It goes like that. It's a B-Wing from Star Wars. Better put that down. But these were awesome toys, and they captured kids' imagination. It was Star Wars, to this day, Star Wars. It's probably the #1 vintage toy I sell. Anything from the 77 to 85 Star Wars toys is like gold. And it's because it keeps being reintroduced. More generations get into it. But the original stuff tends to be what people fall in love with. That's Star Wars. I still just love that they sold an empty box. I mean, then we'll take Star Wars, that takes from the 70s into the 80s. Now the 80s, that's good times. That's my era of childhood, so obviously it's the one I'm most connected to. Where'd she go? Okay, this is actually a doll that came out in the 80s, a Shirley Temple, 81, but it was made to look like the 30s Shirley Temple. But the 80s the 80s is when the whole, we make a cartoon series purely to sell the toy. But they still made great toys. We got, this right here is a Sprite from Rainbow Bright. It actually started out as a Hallmark character they put on cards and whatnot. Well, they partnered with Mattel, released a toy line, did the TV show. Very popular toy amongst women my age. Also, My Little Ponies came out in that era, which is still around. Apparently, a guy fan of ponies is a brony, and they're like serious collectors. We don't judge. Also in the 80s, Transformers. It was a perfect idea. You take a truck or a jet and you turn it into a fighting robot. That's pretty much guaranteed to be loved by all kids. But when they first started, they didn't have enough molds to make the toys, so they had to buy out other companies to produce their own. So you'd get this guy right here. It was actually sold at Radio Shack, Galactic Man. And years later, or 3 years later, it would come back and it would be blue and purple, a little bit different colored. For some reason, they changed his trigger because it's really in a kind of inappropriate spot on the figure. But awesome. That's not annoying. Wow. But they were iconic. I just saw new previews for a Transformers movie, and Optimus Prime was riding a dinosaur. So it's definitely something, but this is an iconic toy for kids from the 80s. He was the ultimate good guy. He was the solid moral standing, do the right thing, save everybody sort of toy. I mean, it's led to the animated series, live-action movies, numerous runs of comic books. This was the Optimus Prime from then. Now, this one's probably about 5 years old, but this is the later one. No, I will not transform it. I will not even attempt it. It's insane. Like, my kid had a few like these, my son, and I don't have an hour and a half to transform it each way. Because they want to make them look so cool. There's all these little panels, but it's still popular. Kids still love it. Yes?
I transformed ours once and that was it.
Yeah. Yeah. That is what you have to do. You don't.
The older ones were easier to transform than the lower.
Yeah. The older ones were more a simple, this is how it works together. Those have all kinds of, you twist it and throw it up in the air 2 times. And also in the 80s, one of the iconic toys was the Masters of the Universe. Remember this? We got Castle Grayskull. Iconic toy. We got He-Man. And Battle Cat. That was a big deal for a lot of kids. Actually, when I asked you guys earlier about the toy for you, this was it for me. That was the toy I got that I loved the absolute most. I didn't expect it at all. I didn't get big toys. I had young parents. We didn't get big toys. And I got this, and there's actually a great picture of me, which I thought about blowing up and bringing in. And it's Christmas morning, and I look like I'm having the ultimate freak out. It's like, but then I seen my mom in the background, nice 80s glasses, morning hair, that look on her face like her son just drug her out of bed at 5 a.m. And I'm like, she will kill me. And I mean literally kill me. So I decided not to. But if you come by the shop, I'm willing to share. In the early 80s, probably outside of Star Wars, the most popular toy line of all time, they restarted G.I. Joe. They changed it up. They moved to the 3 3/4 size figures. Snake Eyes. I mean, they just made movies, and Snake Eyes is still a major character. They came out in 82. As far as the figure goes, there wasn't a lot of changes. In 82, you couldn't move the arm like that, which when you're putting your guys in awesome battle poses, that's important. That's important. But in the 82 G.I. Joe, vehicles and play sets were just kind of standard. You'd have a tank, you'd have a bunker, those sort of things. The golden age of G.I. Joes was 1983 to 1985. And each year they kept increasing, they're bigger, better, awesome. And that's when you got the Night Raven, which is still yes, it is pretty. No drool on the Night Raven. And by 1985, G.I. Joe they had hit their pinnacle, and they released the USS Flag, which is a 7.5-foot aircraft carrier. For those who haven't been in the shop recently, we have one. You got to come in and see it. That's all I'm saying. It's a 7.5-foot aircraft carrier. I remember being a kid, and I was up at Bergner's Mall, in the Beloit Mall, up by their little lunch counter they had, and they had some Power Wheels big box toys, and there was an American flag. And I asked my dad, it's a 7-foot aircraft carrier. He's like, $125. He's like, what is it, bed? Got gold in it? Better do something for $125. And that ended my hope of getting the flag. I mean, if they brought something out like that nowadays, that's a $600, $700 toy to let your kids play with. It's huge. It's absolutely massive. And then after that, like with some toy lines, they just started doing all kinds of weird spaceships. But yeah, by 1985, and I think to me a 7.5-foot aircraft carrier toy totally speaks to the 80s, in the excess of the 80s. Like, really, who needs that? I mean, I need that, but not need it to breathe, but it's just a great toy. I don't know if we'll ever see anything like that again.
They did do one for the color carrier for the Avengers movies.
Yeah, but it's not 7 feet. They did a 7-foot Avengers one?
No, it's not.
Yeah, that's what I mean. They went there, but now if they did the Avengers helicarrier at 7.5 feet, oh yeah, that could take up my living room. So, by the late 80s, dying down. Transformers were still popular, but they weren't quite at the peak. G.I. Joe the same. He-Man was at the end. And then that's when they introduced our friends, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Everyone loves the Ninja Turtles. They were the last toys that I really got into as a kid because they came out in 88. They're based on a comic book. They were awesome. They were Ninja Turtles. They're still around. They're still popular. They have a cartoon series now. They're currently filming a live-action movie. This one's from probably 2005. They're getting better. My issue with this as a kid, it didn't really have good articulation, so it wasn't good for ninja poses. And that's important. That's important. And then these Ninja Turtles right here came out 2014. They're done by the NECA Corporation. These are adult toys. They're not really meant to be played with. They're meant to be collected and displayed. But the Ninja Turtles are here. They're still going strong. You still see a big aisle full of them at Toys R Us. And they were a fun toy. Somewhat silly, but a fun toy. Then we started heading into the 90s, and these toys are just starting to hit the collectibles market. You had your Power Rangers. Those got really popular. Those were the kids were all dressing up as a Green Ranger or something. Also in the 90s, there were Beanie Babies. I mean, if anyone remember those, you know, people were driving 6 hours because there was a fresh shipment of Beanie Babies. Yeah, lining up outside of McDonald's for a McDonald's toy. There was also the Furby, like interactive weird things. The Tickle Me Elmo, which led to the whole riots in stores for a toy. And eventually, I see those toys, those are the next wave to get collectible as people get older. In the mid-90s, it came to the new, things changed. They went to they started gearing towards the adult collector. They had the adult collector toys. You had the die-cast NASCARs that everyone collected, the NASCAR cars. They weren't meant to be played with. They were meant to be collected and displayed. Todd McFarlane, who was a comic book artist, eventually started a toy line, started making his own figures. This one wasn't quite to the adult collector. It still could kind of be played with, but real soon, they weren't meant to be played with. They were purely somewhat articulate statues. But they looked cool, and they're ridiculously popular. Something like this. This is a McFarlane toy. Chucky. You know, it's nice detail. And this stuff is, people love them. They absolutely love the adult collector toys. Sideshow's one, yeah. They do some good things. I mean, if you look, for example, this was the original Masters of the Universe one. This is a more modern version. That's impressive. I mean, I would tell you and be 100% honest with myself, this is a better toy, but they've done some unique things, and toys they're just so very fun. They look cool. They make us feel like kids. We all had them or we wanted them. Hot Wheels. That was one of those things that when setting up the time parameters for this, Hot Wheels are big. Kind of like trains where, yeah. I mean, Hot Wheels were great, though. Small, collectible. Kids loved them. They were good hush-ups. A Hot Wheel, they are hush-ups to this day. They became collectible. Let's see. All right. I think I'm pretty much through the main portion of this. So thank you, guys. Let's do some questions.
Right next to Castle Grayskull, what is that figure?
Yes. Well, this is Apocalypse. He came out from the Marvel Legend line that came out, started early 2000s. This is when they started taking superheroes from the Marvel company, make them really articulate, detailed. They would model them and paint them just like the comic books. They become very popular because this is what Wolverine used to look like, and he looked like this. But what they started was the Build-A-Figure, where you'd collect one piece with each. You'd buy a guy and you'd get an arm. You'd get the other arm, so you'd have to buy the whole series to get him. This is what Apocalypse used to look like. And this is what he looks like now. And they make some unique toys. I don't know how durable they are, but they're cool. Anyone else?
You mentioned how in times of war and so forth, toys tend to trend towards national interests or whatever. Is it true? I've heard, but I was wondering if it was true that Monopoly was created in the 20s and 30s as not for propaganda, but to explain capitalism.
It definitely was kind of created to, this game's going to explain why your life sucks. And if you play it enough, you'll believe it. And that's definitely true. I mean, governments and people in power are going to use whatever they can to do whatever they do. Yes, sir. Well, that too. Monopoly was trying to explain specifically finance because of the Great Depression and the crash at Wall Street, but, going bankrupt, it's okay. Like, anyone else? There's no more questions, though. I'd really like to thank you guys for coming out. I'd like to thank the Janesville Hedberg Library for having me, calling me an expert. And anyone else, friends, family, I wouldn't be here without you guys, and I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Well, I just want to thank Jason again because as much as you might not think you're an expert, I think that you helped all of us reconnect with maybe a certain time period of our own childhood.
That's what's fun.
It is, and sharing the stories and everything is great.